What's up, motocross action? I'm Josh Mosman and welcome to another 125 two-stroke shootout video. This year we have the 2022 125s lined up right here behind me. We had a blast doing our 125 shootout last year. Then Yamaha came out with a brand new YZ125. We said, hey, let's line them up again. Two strokes are not dead, and as long as the manufacturers keep producing them, we're gonna keep testing them. So let's dive into our 2022 125 shootout right here. This year, we have four major players in the 125 class with the brand new Yamaha YZ125, plus we have last year's shootout winner, the KTM 125, as well as the lowered platform Husky 125, and the GasGas MC 125 that is basically a KTM with a more affordable price. Starting things off, we have to address the obvious. One of these bikes has received an all-new engine with an updated chassis, while the other three are exactly the same as last year. They share identical engines and frames with different suspension settings, airbox configurations, seat heights, and triple clamps. Sadly, Honda, Suzuki, and Kawasaki gave up on two strokes years ago, making this 125 shootout a Japan versus Austria, Yamaha versus KTM race. However, KTM brought 3 horses to this race, while Yamaha only has 1. Because Husqvarna and GasGas each have the core components of KTM's DNA, you'd think that they all work the same, but the differences are more than you'd expect, and it's proven in our lap time comparisons for our pro and novice test riders. We do wish we had a TM 125 like we had last year, but we couldn't track one down in time, and we didn't stress about it too much since the bike hasn't changed. We also would have loved to have the beautiful 125XX from Fantic, but they have an agreement with Yamaha that forbids them from importing bikes to the US. The Yamaha YZ125 has some serious momentum coming into this test. If you love 125s, you've probably already seen our recent 2022 Yamaha YZ125 versus Husky TC 125 comparison test video, where I actually scored a faster lap time on the new Yamaha than I did on the Husky. But before we get into the track tested comparisons, let's highlight the updates that were made to the new YZ125. Most of our viewers know that the YZ125 has stayed basically the same since 2006, and with Honda, Kawasaki, and Suzuki discontinuing their two-strokes, Yamaha was able to continue selling the same model year after year because they had a great YZ125 that was extremely fun to ride. Eventually, the KTM came up and passed the Yamaha in engine performance, but with only 2 major brands competing in the 125 market, Yamaha did not need to worry. The YZ125 still sold to anyone who didn't like KTM or to riders who wanted something more affordable and easier to ride. Our test riders complained for years that the Yamaha wasn't making any updates to the YZ125 and YZ250 two-stroke models, and finally, right when we stopped complaining and simply became thankful that Yamaha was still producing two-strokes, they actually came out with a brand new Yamaha YZ125, fixing everything we asked them to fix and leaving everything we asked them to leave. It was truly an answer to our wishes. So what changed? First, let's go over a little history. Yamaha made major updates in 2005 when they came out with an all-new engine, radically changed from the previous 1996 engine, and they also switched from their previous steel frame to the aluminum frame in 2005 as well. Yamaha then brought out the brilliant Kayaba SSS forks in 2006, and they have been a huge hit ever since. MXA has loved the chassis and the suspension on this bike for years, and many of our test riders have called the YZ125 the most fun fun bike to ride straight from the showroom floor. Our biggest complaint of the last decade has been the engine. We wanted to take the ultra fun handling YZ125 and have it hold pace with the faster KTM engines down the straightaways. In 2022, Yamaha kept the same frame, made some minor updates to the KYB SSS forks, kept the same triple clamps, swing arm, and linkage so that the handling stayed practically the same. As for the rest of the bike, it did get some serious changes. Nearly every functional part of the engine is new. It's got a new cylinder body, cylinder head, cylinder port shape, cylinder port timing, piston, piston pin, connecting rod, crankcase, crankshaft, flywheel, transmission, shift shaft, reed valve, power valve, as well as the pipe and silencer are all new. The YZ125 also has a new rear fender, new side number panels, subframe, seat base, and air filter cage that have all been updated to flow more air into the engine from underneath the back of the seat, and thankfully it still uses the same YZ125 air filter. It also comes with a Kian PWK S38 carburetor now instead of the 38mm Mikuni TMX it had before. Adding to the list of new parts is a fuel tank, radiator louvers, new airbox, new brakes that came off of the YZ250F and YZ450F models, Bridgestone Battlecross X20 tires, a new chain, and a new 49-tooth rear sprocket. Getting into Yamaha's competition, the KTM, Husqvarna, and GasGas are basically the same for 2022. The updates for KTM are limited to new graphics in an orange frame now instead of black. The Husky has new graphics and a Brembo clutch instead of Magura, and the GasGas is exactly the same. As usual, our shootout results come after gathering opinions from a wide range of testers, riding each bike in its stock form back to back with the competition. We hand-selected our smallest and best 125 riders to make these bikes look good for this video, but when the cameras were off, and what you don't see is that we used opinions from over 15 novice, vet, and pro riders to help us come up with our shootout results. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion about how they think each bike works, but the beauty of motocross action is that we have the resources and abilities to ride them all on the same day, doing a true-to-life comparison as often as we want. It's easy for us to relate to people who think the KTM, Husky, and GasGas bikes work the same on the track because frankly, it can be difficult to tell the difference if you don't eliminate the variables. We had a blast shaking down these 125 two-strokes, and many of our testers were surprised with the lap time differences they had between the Austrian brands. In this next segment, I'll break down a mini shootout within a shootout, explaining the pros and cons of the orange, white, and red smokers, and afterwards, we'll compare the Yamaha against each of the Austrian bikes. Starting with the GasGas, this bike was built to steal customers from Yamaha. At $6,899, it has the same retail price of the new YZ with the same engine, carburetor, frame, subframe, swing arm, and suspension as the KTM. Plus, the GasGas by far wins the best looking bike in the class with its cherry red steel frame and red plastics, along with the shiny silver rims that match the triple clamps and handlebars perfectly. The noticeable difference between the GasGas and the KTM are the forged aluminum triple clamps, the closed-off airbox cover, the softer suspension settings. With these parts, KTM has targeted an audience that's more focused on fun rather than winning races. Generally, GasGas buyers can be split into two categories. First is the rider who likes the idea of softer and more plush suspension and triple clamps that make the bumps feel smaller, even if that means that it won't corner as precisely. The second rider who will buy a GasGas is one who plans on sending his suspension off to be sprung and valved for him anyways, and he already has aftermarket triple clamps in mind, basically turning his GasGas into a red KTM. Comparing the GasGas to the Husky on the track, it is surprisingly faster than the Husqvarna coming out of corners, making it easier to get into the meat of the power and better for experienced riders who want to go fast. Compared to the KTM, the GasGas fits in between the Husky and KTM on power delivery because the shape of the airbox is better for flowing air than it is on the Husky, and the smallest differences in power are magnified when you're riding stock two-strokes in the sub 40 horsepower range. In this class, slight modifications suspensions make for significant improvements. As for the handling, the GasGas is softer and more comfortable for novice riders, but too soft for serious racers. Overall, the GasGas MC 125 is $600 less than the KTM, $700 less than the Husky, and it was actually a better race bike than the Husky was for our experienced test riders. Next up, the Husqvarna TC 125. Husky has been under the KTM umbrella since 2014, but before that, Husky 125 was white, black, and red, and it was made in Italy with plastics that were considered oddball at the time, but now they're actually coming into style. The differences between the $7,599 Husqvarna and the KTM are noticeable on the track, and its first and foremost noticeable difference is the lower suspension platform. Husky threw a Hail Mary in 2021 when they shortened their forks by 10 millimeters, lengthened the seal head on the shock, and came up with a different linkage geometry to lower the rear end about an inch. The other major difference is the airbox, as we already mentioned. Husqvarna's come with a carbon fiber composite subframe that has a slightly different shape for the airbox that mutes the power. The muted throttle response is noticeable on the FC 450 four-stroke, but that same sensation that we talk about on the 450 is magnified when you go down to the 250 four-stroke, and even more when you get onto the 125 two-stroke. Compared to the KTM and GasGas, the Husky is harder to get into the power band, meaning it's easier to bog off the corner exit of tight corners, and it's not as responsive at the crack of the throttle. As for the handling, every one of our testers preferred the lower suspension of the Husky. Although it didn't pull as well out of the tight corners, the Husky dove into ruts easier and was more nimble to move. The lower center of gravity is something that we cherish about the Husky. As for the real nuts and bolts, the Husky is better for novice riders than it is for pros. In lap times, pro riders were as much as a second and a half slower on the Husky than they were on the KTM 125, while the lap times for our novice testers were completely opposite. They were actually a full second faster on the Husky than they were even on the GasGas, which is traditionally a favorite for vet and novice testers. Now, for the heart and soul of Austria, the KTM 125 SX. At $7,499, the ready-to-race tagline for KTM rings true for this bike especially. Weighing in at 194 pounds, the KTM has the raciest suspension settings that have stiffer valving than the GasGas and Husky offerings, and it has the airbox with the most ventilation, giving it the snappiest throttle response and best power. Engines require fuel, air, and spark to ignite combustion and produce power at the rear wheel. By suffocating an engine, you're decreasing potential power. The KTM 125 SX picks up and goes, creating a power band that is ultra fun to ride, and it has a suspension that can handle the higher speeds as well as bigger jumps and bumps. All of the Austrian 125s feature the WP Exact air forks that received major improvements in 2021, and they come stock with other parts that are only available in the aftermarket for other brands like Yamaha. These parts are the counterbalancer in the two-stroke to reduce vibration in the engine. KTMs, Huskies, and GasGas also come with steel braided brake lines, ultra durable clutches with steel clutch baskets that have the primary gear built in. They come with a Brembo clutch and brake levers that are easy to adjust. They come with ODI lock-on grips, a super convenient no tools airbox with a twin air filter, and it even has trick little rubber grommets that hold the kill switch wires, keeping the handlebars nice, clean, and really professional looking. Out of the 3 Austrian bikes, the KTM is best for the racer, the Husky is best for the beginner, novice, and local vet rider, and the GasGas is best for the rider who wants to save a few bucks and stand out for the crowd. And yes, you can get KTM power by poking holes or ordering a UFO airbox cover for your GasGas, but you'll still have softer suspension settings and the forged aluminum triple clamps that we mentioned about. Now that we know all about the Austrian brands, let's figure out where the Yamaha YZ125 fits into the mix. The Yamaha YZ125 didn't blow our socks off, but its performance on the track is better than its dyno numbers indicate. The dyno numbers are down about 2 horsepower, but thankfully the power it does have is at least placed where it needs to be for 125 racing. We just wish there was more of it. More power will give us more room for error, and it would help us recover from mistakes. As mentioned already, the Yamaha used to be the best bike for play riding, while the KTM was the best for racing, but this is not the case anymore. Yamaha lost the easy-to-ride character for 2022 when they went searching for more horsepower and more torque. On the dyno, the 2022 YZ125 is slower than the 2021 model off the crack of the throttle, being as far as 1.5 horsepower off the old bike at 6,500 RPM. The 2022 model really kicks in at 7,500 RPM, and it is 1 horsepower stronger than last year's bike where it is ridden most, only really losing out at the crack of the throttle to last year's bike. The Austrian bikes had stock jetting that worked great for us at sea level in Southern California, but the jetting on the new YZ125 needed some work, as expected for a new year model. We went up from a 160 to a 162 main jet and went down from a 75 to a 72 on the Pilot. We also moved the clip on the needle from the second to the first line to the top to lean it out. The other change we made to the Yamaha was added a tooth to the rear sprocket, going from a 1348 to a 1349 ratio. Both changes helped us get out of corners and get into the power easier. To continue with the same theme as the engine, the YZ125 handling is also targeted to a faster, heavier, and more experienced rider than it was previously. The engine used to be novice friendly, the suspension used to be soft and plush, and it was great for novices as well. Now, the spring rates have increased from 4.2 to 4.3 in the forks and 4.6 to 4.8 in the shock, and the valving has been made stiffer as well. Plus, the new subframe and seat create a flatter topography for the bike that also has a taller seat height as well. Sadly, the engine didn't live up to anyone's expectations, but it at least took a step closer to the KTM. After producing the same engine for 17 years that still held its own against the KTM, everyone expected the new YZ125 to easily catch up. Unfortunately, many of us underestimated the steps that KTM has taken to advance their breed, and now, just after Yamaha took a step closer to KTM in their 125s in 2022, KTM and Husqvarna are prepared to release all-new two-strokes in 2023 to match the all-new 2022 factory edition four-strokes that just came out. All right guys, let's get into the rankings. When it comes to winning races, scoring fast lap times, and picking Motocross Action's 125 two-stroke bike of the year, the engine and power delivery play the biggest factor. How come? Because all 125 two-strokes handle fairly well. At 194 pounds for the Austrian bikes and about 203 pounds for the Yamaha, All of these bikes are lightweight and nimble. With engines producing less than 40 horsepower, the bikes aren't pulling hard enough or going fast enough to really have bad handling. They all handle pretty good. The meat and potatoes needed for a good 125 is a power delivery that's tailored for you. Coming in fourth place for our shootout is the Yamaha YZ125. The new YZ125 is better than its previous version for fast racers, but not good enough to jump past the KTM offerings. It's also worse for riders who are less experienced with shifting, clutching, and maintaining a high RPM. Sadly, the engine didn't live up to our expectations, but it at least took a step closer to the KTM. After producing the same engine for 17 years, as we already mentioned, we expected the new YZ125 to catch up to the KTM and really to be a KTM killer. Sadly, the engine didn't live up to our expectations, but it at least took a step closer to the KTM. Now, the YZ125 is more tailored to faster and heavier riders, which is great for Yamaha lovers that already own a YZ125 because it's definitely a better bike. But it's not so great that they'll be pulling better starts than a KTM. In a tie for second place, we have the GasGas MC 125. In 2021, we ranked the GasGas third in our 125 shootout, just behind the Husky. After more testing, more lap time comparisons, and more racing at events like the World Two-Stroke Championship, we determined that it wasn't fair to put the GasGas behind the Husky in our 125 shootout anymore, even though these bikes didn't change. Although the GasGas has the closed-off airbox, softer suspension settings, and triple clamps that weren't as precise, our experienced test riders and our real racers preferred to race the GasGas than the Husky because they had more power coming out of turns, and they can only attribute the fact that it has more power than the Husky just because of the shape of the efficient KTM airbox. Also coming in second place in that tie is the Husqvarna TC 125. Although the Husky TC 125 has to share second place with the GasGas, all is not lost. If we were doing a shootout for the best 125 play bike, or the best 125 for novices, or the best handling 125, this bike would easily win. All of our novice level testers went fast on the Husky because of its smooth, easy to manage power, and its lowered suspension. Our novice test riders and our vet test riders were faster on the Husky than they were on the GasGas, KTM, and even Yamaha. On the contrary, our pro test riders were slower on the Husky than they were on the Yamaha, KTM, and GasGas because of that same smooth but slow throttle response. And finally, winning MXA's 125 two-stroke shootout for 2 years in a row is the KTM 125SX. The KTM wins the 125 Bike of the Year award because it's best suited for racers. With a 2 horsepower advantage on Yamaha, a snappier throttle response than Husky and GasGas, suspension settings that hold up better for racing and riding rougher tracks, the KTM is ready to win races. Although it costs $600 more than the Yamaha, if you were to spend that same money on the Yamaha, yes, you could get closer to the KTM, but then you could have just bought a KTM in the first place, so you'll be back to square one when the KTM owner makes the same mods to his bike. that's it for MXA's 125 two-stroke shootout. As always, we had a blast riding these 125s, and like we mentioned, two-strokes aren't dead, and we're not going to stop testing them until they stop selling them. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you want more information on these specific bikes or on this shootout, check out Motocross Action Magazine. Also, check out motocrossactionmag.com. We have information about these bikes on there, as well as the latest news, reviews, bike tests, product tests, race results, and more. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you in the next video.